"Don't come back, Elena. We're done with you." My mother's voice didn't shake. It didn't crack. It didn't even sound angry. It sounded relieved. 32 seconds long. I know because I replayed it until the timestamp burned into my brain. "You made your choice. We're moving on. You should too." Click. That was it. No fight beforehand, no explanation, no warning. Just an erasure. I was standing barefoot in my kitchen in Austin, holding a dish towel, staring at my phone like it had glitched. The air still smelled like garlic and olive oil. The pasta on the stove was boiling over. My name had just been deleted from my own family. I didn't cry. That's important. I didn't scream. I didn't call her back. I didn't send paragraphs. I typed one word. Okay. And I meant it. Not as surrender, as permission. Because here's what they didn't know when my mother left that voicemail. They weren't cutting me off. They were cutting off the only thing quietly keeping their world stable. By midnight, 3 phone calls had already come through from my older brother Daniel. I ignored them. By 6 a.m., there were 14. By 9 a.m., their real estate agent had sent me an email that wasn't meant for me. Subject line? Need signature ASAP. Investor presentation tomorrow. That's when I realized something. I wasn't being removed. I was being replaced. And they were pounding on me not noticing. By noon, I had made 3 decisions that would change everything. By sunset, their "moving on without you" had become a countdown. And by the next morning, the room they had planned to celebrate in was the room they'd be exposed in. They thought the voicemail was power. They had no idea I owned the stage they were about to stand on. I'm Elena Marquez, 32, operations director for a mid-sized investment firm that specializes in commercial redevelopment. In simple terms, I clean up financial messes. What nobody knew, not my friends, not my coworkers, was that I'd been doing the same thing for my family since I was 19. Daniel is my older brother by 4 years, charismatic, loud, the kind of man who can sell ambition like it's already success. My parents adored that energy, called him visionary. They called me reliable. When Daniel's startup failed, I wired $18,000 without blinking. When he temporarily moved back in with my parents, I paid the overdue property taxes quietly so the house wouldn't go into default. When my mother needed a new SUV because clients judge appearances, I handled the down payment. Nobody ever asked me how I afforded it. They just assumed I would, because I always did. 3 years ago, Daniel decided he was ready to scale. He found a development property, a small commercial plaza outside the city, coffee shop space, 2 retail units, room for upside. He needed leverage, my credit, my liquidity, my signature, but not my name publicly. That was important. "It'll look cleaner if it's just me and Dad on paper," he said casually. "You'll be protected behind the scenes." Behind the scenes. I should have heard it then. Instead, I formed an LLC to structure the deal properly. I structured it with ownership percentages. Majority control, 51%. In my name. Daniel never asked to read the operating agreement. He trusted the narrative more than the paperwork. And that was his first mistake. The voicemail wasn't about hurt feelings. It came 2 days after Daniel secured a major investor presentation for the plaza. He thought he didn't need me anymore. He thought momentum replaced leverage. What he didn't realize was simple. He didn't just need my money. He needed my ownership. And that investor presentation scheduled for Friday wasn't happening without me. The morning after the voicemail, Daniel didn't call to apologize. He called because someone important was asking where I was. Daniel didn't say hello when I finally answered. "Elena, where are you?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Can we talk?" Just logistics. "I'm at work," I said calmly. A sharp exhale on the other end. "We have the investor walkthrough tomorrow. You can't disappear right now." Disappear. Interesting word choice. "I didn't disappear," I said. "I was told not to come back." Silence. Then the pivot. Mom was upset. She didn't mean it like that. Of course she didn't. "She sounded clear," I replied. "Elena," his tone tightened, This isn't the time to be dramatic. We're finalizing the capital infusion. The presentation materials need your compliance sign-off. There it was. Not sister, not daughter, compliance. You can proceed without me, I said lightly. No, we can't. And that was the first honest thing he'd said all week. The plaza acquisition wasn't simple. It had layered financing, bridge loan, private equity, conditional zoning approvals. I structured that stack. And buried in the operating agreement was a clause Daniel had skimmed over. Major financial decisions required majority member approval. Me. He thought he had control because he had visibility. He had signage mock-ups, artist renderings, social media teasers. What he didn't have was authorization. Daniel, he lowered his voice, don't sabotage this. I leaned back in my chair. You already moved on without me, I said. I'm just respecting that. Another silence. Then quieter, almost nervous. The investor specifically asked if the majority member would be present. I smiled. Of course he did. Investors don't invest in noise. They invest in structure. Then you should have thought about that before cutting me out, I said softly. Elena, Daniel, we stayed there in that tense standoff for a few seconds. Then he tried one more angle. You wouldn't embarrass us like that. I ended the call without answering. Because embarrassment wasn't the goal. Clarity was. By afternoon, my mother texted, family comes before business. I didn't respond. Because this was never business for them. It was control. And tomorrow, in a conference room filled with people who only respected ownership, control was about to change hands. They expected me to stay silent during the presentation. They forgot I owned the microphone. Friday morning, the sky over Austin was sharp and bright, the kind of clear blue that makes everything look clean, even when it isn't. Daniel rented a private conference space at the plaza itself. Glass walls, catered coffee, renderings printed on foam boards like it was already a success story. My parents were early. Of course they were. Mom in a cream blazer, rehearsing phrases like family-owned development group. Dad pacing, pretending this was all under control. Daniel stood near the front screen, confident, magnetic, running through slides on his laptop. He didn't expect me to come. That's what made it perfect. I walked in at 9:07 a.m., not rushed, not angry, just present. Every head turned. Daniel froze mid-sentence. Mom's eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. You said not to come back, I said evenly. You didn't say I couldn't show up for my own company. The investor, Mr. Halverson, stood from the far end of the table. Mid-50s, sharp eyes, expensive restraint. Ms. Marquez? He extended his hand. Majority partner, correct? I held his handshake just long enough. Correct. The word landed heavy in the room. Daniel recovered quickly. We were just getting started. I nodded and took a seat, not beside my family, across from them. Daniel ran through projections, growth curves, tenant interest, revenue forecasts. He was good. He always was. But numbers on a screen mean nothing without authorization. Halfway through, Mr. Halverson asked the question that shifted the temperature. And capital deployment approval, that requires majority consent? Daniel hesitated. One signature, I answered calmly. The room went quiet. Mr. Halverson looked at me. And do you consent? I folded my hands on the table. I'm reviewing. Mom inhaled sharply. Daniel's jaw tightened. Elena, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time, I said gently. Because this wasn't revenge, it was alignment. Mr. Halverson leaned back in his chair, studying the dynamic. Investors don't just evaluate property, they evaluate stability. And what he was watching wasn't stability. It was fracture. I'd like to hear from Ms. Marquez directly. What are your concerns? Daniel shot me a warning look. I ignored it. My concern, I said clearly, is governance. I let that word breathe. Because governance sounds professional, betrayal sounds emotional, and in a room like this, professional wins. Daniel thought I was going to air family drama. He didn't realize I was going to air documentation. Governance? Daniel forced a laugh. We're aligned. I didn't look at him. I looked at the investor. Alignment requires transparency, I said, and this week I was removed from family communication channels tied to this development. Mom shifted in her seat. That was personal. No, I said evenly, it wasn't. I slid a slim folder across the table, not dramatic, just deliberate. Inside were printed communications, not emotional texts, operational ones. Vendor updates I hadn't been copied on, emails from the real estate agent excluding me, an internal memo where Daniel had referred to me as a passive stakeholder. Passive. Mr. Halverson read carefully. He didn't blink. He didn't interrupt. Daniel leaned forward. We were streamlining. She's busy. I'm not passive, I said. I hold 51%. That requires consultation under Section 4.2 of the operating agreement. I didn't raise my voice. I quoted, and that's far worse. The investor's assistant flipped through her tablet, cross-checking. Mr. Halverson's tone cooled. Is there internal dispute regarding authority? Daniel's jaw tightened. No. Yes, I said at the same time. Silence again. That's the thing about public rooms. Truth doesn't have to yell. It just has to be documented. I was instructed not to come back 2 days ago. Simultaneously, materials were being prepared to present this as a consolidated leadership structure. Mom tried again. That voicemail wasn't about the business. It became about the business when I was excluded from governance communications, I said. Mr. Halverson closed the folder. I don't invest in instability, he said plainly, and I certainly don't invest where majority ownership is fractured. Daniel's confidence cracked, just slightly. This is being blown out of proportion, he insisted. I finally looked at him. No, I said softly, this is being clarified. The investor stood. We'll postpone capital commitment until ownership alignment is resolved. Postpone. Such a polite word. It sounded so small. But for Daniel, it was oxygen being removed. Mom's face drained of color. Dad stared at the table like it might offer instructions. Daniel turned to me, voice low and sharp. You just cost us everything. I stood slowly. No, I corrected him. You did that the night you decided I was disposable. The investor shook my hand once more before leaving. I appreciate transparency, he said. Transparency. That word hung in the room long after he walked out, and when the door finally closed, there were no foam boards left to hide behind, just family and consequences. They thought the worst part was losing the investor. They didn't realize that wasn't the room I was waiting for. The conference room emptied fast once the investor left. Assistants packed up tablets, catering staff cleared untouched pastries. Daniel ripped a projection sheet off the board like tearing it could undo the damage. But the real silence started when the door shut and it was just us. Mom spoke first. How dare you? Not why, not let's talk, just offense. How dare I asked quietly. You embarrassed your own family. I almost laughed. You told me I wasn't family. Daniel stepped closer. You could have handled that privately. You tried to remove me privately. Dad finally looked up. Elena, was this necessary? Yes. That answer landed like a dropped glass. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Do you know what this does to our reputation? I held his stare. Do you know what you did to mine? That's when the anger shifted, because humiliation hits differently when there's an audience. And there had been an audience. But I wasn't done. You think losing one investor is the worst part? I asked. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What else did you do? I didn't respond immediately, because control isn't loud, it's timed. I reviewed the vendor contracts last night, I said evenly. 3 of them were signed without majority authorization. Mom blinked. So, I said calmly, they're void. Daniel's face went pale. You wouldn't. I already notified the legal review team. That was the moment it clicked. They didn't just need my approval for investment, they needed it for execution. Permits, renovation, tenant agreements, all dependent on the operating structure. And the structure was me. You're destroying this out of spite, Daniel snapped. No, I'm enforcing governance. Professional words hurt more. Dad stood upright. Enough. This is going too far. I looked at him. It went too far when you decided I was useful but not necessary. Mom's voice cracked for the first time. What do you want? Finally, the right question. I didn't hesitate. I want transparency. Publicly. Daniel frowned. Publicly? Yes. That word settled heavy in the air. because the humiliation they felt in that conference room was controlled, limited, contained, but there was another room coming, bigger, louder, with people who knew their names, and that was the stage they truly cared about. The development wasn't just a business deal, it was being announced that weekend, and I was still listed as keynote partner. Saturday night was supposed to be their victory lap. The plaza was hosting a community revitalization reveal. Press invited, local council members attending, potential tenants networking. Daniel had been teasing it for weeks on social media. Big things coming, proud of what we're building, family legacy project. Family. I almost admire the irony. They couldn't remove me from the LLC fast enough, but my name was still printed on every banner. Marquez Development Group. Founding partners, Daniel Marquez and Elena Marquez. Rebranding takes time. Consequences don't. I arrived 5 minutes before the ribbon cutting. The plaza was lit beautifully. String lights overhead, a small stage, podium, local news van parked near the corner. Mom looked flawless. Daniel looked confident again. Borrowed confidence, but still. He didn't see me at first. The host began the introduction. Tonight, we celebrate the revitalization of this commercial space under the leadership of Daniel Marquez and majority partner Elena Marquez. Majority partner. It's funny how that phrase travels. Heads turned. Daniel froze when he finally saw me near the front row. I was holding a single folder. Nothing dramatic, nothing oversized, just documentation. When the host invited us both to the stage, Daniel hesitated, but cameras were rolling. He couldn't refuse without explaining why. I walked up calmly. Applause scattered through the crowd. He leaned toward me under his breath. "What are you doing?" I replied, "Transparency." He gave his rehearsed speech first, talked about vision, talked about growth, talked about community investment. He never mentioned governance. When it was my turn, the microphone felt light in my hand. I didn't smile. I didn't attack. I told the truth. "This project represents shared ownership," I said clearly, "and shared ownership requires shared accountability." The crowd quieted. I was informed this week that I was no longer part of this family's future. Simultaneously, financial actions were taken that excluded majority approval. Daniel's jaw tightened. Mom looked like she'd swallowed something sharp. "I want to be clear," I continued evenly. "All future development decisions will follow the operating agreement strictly. No contracts will be valid without majority authorization." I let that sink in. Then I added, calmly, "And until alignment is restored, project expansion is paused." Murmurs moved through the audience. Not explosive. Worse. Controlled confusion. Local council members exchanged looks. The reporter near the front adjusted his mic. Daniel reached for the microphone, forcing a laugh. "Elena's just being thorough." I stepped back slightly. Thorough is how investors stay confident. Public rooms shift power fast. Daniel wasn't charismatic anymore. He was cornered, and when someone is cornered publicly, the cracks show. I could have stopped there, but Daniel made one mistake on stage that forced me to open the folder. Daniel grabbed the microphone too fast. He said, "She's overreacting," smiling tightly at the crowd. "There are no internal disputes. Everything is aligned." That sentence sealed it, because when you lie privately, it's manageable. When you lie publicly, on record, it becomes evidence. I stepped forward again. "Daniel," I said calmly, "is that your official statement?" His smile flickered. "Yes." Cameras were still rolling. The local reporter was visibly alert now. I opened the folder. Inside were printed copies of the operating agreement, highlighted sections visible even from a distance. Section 4.2, Majority Consent Required. I held one copy up just slightly, not theatrically, just enough. "For clarity," I said into the mic, 3 vendor agreements were signed without majority authorization this week." The murmuring grew louder. "I have notified legal review. Those contracts are currently invalid pending compliance." Daniel's face went from red to pale in seconds. Mom whispered, "Elena, stop." I didn't. Additionally, I continued evenly, I was instructed not to come back 2 days ago via voicemail. At the same time, communications were altered to remove me from operational discussions. You could feel the crowd recalculating, not cheering, not gasping, just reassessing. And reputation doesn't collapse loudly. It collapses quietly when doubt spreads. Daniel tried again. "This is family stuff." I replied, "It became business the moment governance was bypassed." The reporter stepped closer. "Are you saying there's internal mismanagement?" I didn't accuse, I didn't attack. I'm saying majority ownership cannot be overridden by convenience. That's it. Professional, measured, devastating. Daniel's voice lost its smooth edge. "You're sabotaging us." "No, I'm protecting the structure." I stepped away from the mic. No yelling, no emotional meltdown, just clarity. And clarity in public is lethal. Within minutes, the council representative declined to comment on future partnership announcements. The investor group that had been circling quietly withdrew. And Daniel? For the first time in his life, he wasn't the visionary. He was the liability. Mom didn't look at me when she left the stage. Dad couldn't. Daniel stared like he was trying to understand how the narrative slipped from his hands. But the truth is simple. Narratives only work when the other person stays silent. I didn't stay silent. The fallout didn't explode that night. It unraveled over the next 72 hours, and that's when the real humiliation began. Humiliation isn't loud. It's slow. It seeps. By Monday morning, the article was up. Majority owner pauses Marquez development amid internal governance questions. Neutral, professional wording. But the damage was precise. Daniel wasn't described as visionary. He was described as co-owner pending clarification. That phrase alone reshaped everything. Two tenants who had verbally committed asked for written confirmation of ownership stability. One withdrew entirely. The city council postponed zoning fast-tracking. Investors don't like friction. Banks don't like risk. Public projects don't like uncertainty. And Daniel had just been labeled uncertain. Mom called at 7:14 a.m., not yelling this time, quiet. "Why did you have to do it like that?" I let her sit in the silence. "Like what?" "In public." "You cut me off in private," I said evenly. "That didn't seem to bother you." A long pause. Dad called later. "This could have been handled inside the family." "It was handled inside the operating agreement," I replied. Daniel didn't call. He posted instead, a vague statement about strategic restructuring. Comments were divided, some supportive, some skeptical. That's the thing about public exposure. You don't control interpretation. You only control facts. By Wednesday, Daniel requested a formal ownership mediation. Not because he wanted peace, because lenders were asking questions. The LLC agreement suddenly mattered. The signatures suddenly mattered. My okay text suddenly mattered. They told me to move on. So I did. Without their protection, without their approval, without their permission. And when the structure trembled, they realized something brutal. I was never the backup plan. I was the foundation. 3 weeks later, Daniel sat across from me at a mediation table, and for the first time in his life, he asked for terms instead of giving them. 3 weeks later, we sat in a neutral office downtown. No cameras, no stage lights, no applause. Just a mediator, 2 lawyers, and a long glass table. Daniel looked different, less polished, less certain. He didn't open with a speech this time. He opened with numbers. "We want to buy out your share." There it was. Not sister, not reconciliation, equity. I let him talk. They had scrambled for emergency capital, liquidated a small asset, brought in a secondary silent investor at a steep discount. It was messy, expensive, embarrassing. Mom tried to keep her composure. Dad avoided eye contact. Daniel slid the offer across the table. It was higher than market value. Not generous, desperate. "Why now?" I asked calmly. Daniel exhaled. "Because no one will move forward while you're publicly positioned against us." I nodded slowly. "I'm not against you. I'm against misalignment." The mediator blinked at that. Daniel didn't argue. He knew the optics had shifted. The city knew, investors knew, the press knew. You can survive financial strain. You can't survive public doubt. I agreed to the buyout, under 3 conditions: public clarification of ownership structure, formal acknowledgement of governance violations, and a signed release preventing any future use of my name in branding or representation. No family discount, no emotional compromise, just terms. They signed. The wire transfer hit my account 2 days later. more than I originally invested, more than the mortgage payments I'd covered, more than the cost of humiliation. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post. I didn't gloat. I just slept. Because peace is quiet. Mom hasn't left another voicemail. Dad texts occasionally. Daniel doesn't mention me in interviews anymore. And that's fine. Because here's what I learned. Family isn't defined by who shares your last name. It's defined by who respects your ownership. When my mother said, "You're out, don't come back," I said, "Okay," and I moved first. Not out of anger, out of clarity. If someone tells you you're disposable, believe them. Then remove yourself strategically. Not loudly, not emotionally, strategically. And watch who suddenly realizes your absence isn't relief, it's risk. If this story felt familiar, if you've ever been the invisible backbone while being treated like an extra, tell me, where are you listening from? And would you have done the same? And if you believe in owning your value instead of begging for it, hit like and subscribe. Because strength isn't loud, but it's undeniable.